Can you see my screen, yeah?
Yeah.
So we finished off on efficiencies last week, innit? And we did a few of those graphs. I'm just gonna go through a few of those graphs again just to stress the importance of knowing them, because it was a bit confusing last week. So if I want to show a firm that's in perfect competition, how would its revenue curve look like? Do you remember? Its revenue curve would be a horizontal line, yeah?
Yeah, that's equal to demand.
Yeah. So that's demand, and that's also equal to average
Average
revenue
revenue.
and your marginal revenue. Okay. So this is a firm in perfect competition. Now our cost curves always stay the same. So we have a marginal cost that looks like this. And then with a perfect competition in the long run, it makes zero profits, or what we call it in economics is normal profits. Okay. And your average cost looks like this. And your marginal cost has to cut through the midpoint of it all. Okay. So this is where the firm is producing. We have quantity on the y-axis. We can represent three things. We can represent the price slash the cost slash the revenues that we can make. And this is the price level here. All right. Now, we can't show that this firm is making any profits because its costs and revenues are the same at the same point here. Okay. At the same time, we can also describe this in terms of efficiencies. But we'll look at that later when we actually look at perfect competition a bit deeper. If we have a firm now in imperfect competition, how would its revenue curves differ this time? Well, it's like this, isn't it? This graph that we see here.
Yeah.
We now have diagonal lines. But remember that this first one here, this diagonal line, this is a demand curve, and this is equal to your average revenue. But we proved this using a table. If you look back at the notes or the videos, that your marginal revenue is twice as steep. Okay, that's just the rule. Then we have a normal marginal cost again. And depending again where we draw our average cost curve, like this one here, we can show either three types of profits. We can show normal profits again, like we did here, or we can show positive profits or negative profits. In other words, if it's positive, then it's called supernormal profits. If it's negative, it's called subnormal profits. Sometimes supernormal profits is also called abnormal profits. So if I want to show supernormal profits, for example, where would I have to draw my average cost curve? Anyone know?
Yeah.
Below the average revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, below the average revenue, because you have to keep your costs lower than your revenue. So remember, when you draw it, you have to try to make sure your marginal cost is at the bottom of your average cost. So something like this. Okay. But now, where would this imperfect firm produce at what point?
MC is equal to MR.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what condition is this?
Profit maximizing.
Yeah, exactly. Profit max. Okay, and that is where MC crosses MR at this point here. And now because we have to represent the supernormal profits, we have to show where our costs are and where our revenues are. If we go upwards, we hit our cost curve first. So this is our cost. So denote this as C. Keep on going up on the dotted line. Then we hit our revenue curve, which is also our price. And we can put P or R here, doesn't matter. And now we have this square here, which is represents our supernormal profits, okay? And now you can draw the same curve if you want to show negative profits or subnormal profits. Where would we have to draw our average cost curve?
Above the average revenue.
Yeah, exactly. So I won't do another one, but it'll be something like this. Okay. And then you do the same thing. So you would hit your revenue first, and then your cost would hit like up here. So your cost is higher than your revenue, and you shade that box in. That shows you your negative profits. We don't really need to draw this, but just in case you get in like a multiple choice or something like this, then it might come in handy. Where would you draw our curve? This is the tricky one. Where would you draw a curve if we want to show normal profits?
You would put it where AC is equal to AR.
So yes, so you would draw it so that so you want to basically have where C equals R, right?
Yeah.
Where your cost is equal to revenue, and that happens, I'll draw it in blue. That will happen if you hit this point here. And to hit this point here, your AR should equal your AC. Okay. And in order to show that, you need to make this tangent to this point here. Your AC would be here for normal profits, NP. Okay. So it doesn't cross over, it has to be tangent. Just
Why
like
can't it cross over?
because for there's a confusion between sales maximization, which is also equal to AC equals AR. So this is a objective of a firm. And
Yeah.
then when you have normal profits, to show normal profits in an imperfect diagram, it has to be tangent.
Oh, okay.
Say if you look at this diagram here, this can't have so this can show normal profits, but like if you ever get asked to show it, you have to it's better to show it like this, and we'll see it when we draw a monopolistic diagram. It's a bit confusing now, it's hard to explain, but you have to go
All right.
through the monopolistic market structure to understand.
Yeah.
So these are some of the objectives of the firm, like profit max, revenue max. And this point here, where AC crosses AR, this would be sales maximization. Okay,
Yeah.
which is the maximum amount you produce. This point here, this is normal profits.
Yeah.
So just know when you want to show normal profits with the imperfect diagram, you need to try to make it tangent. Okay. I'm gonna skip this for now because I want to go straight into perfect competition. While we're
Now, I
on
got
it.
a question real quick.
Yeah.
Do you know dynamic efficiency? What's like the definition of it again?
Dynamic efficiency. So anytime you see supernormal profits,
Yeah.
that firm is said to have dynamic efficiency, where basically in the long run, they can invest their supernormal profits back into the business and try to lower their cost. Dynamic efficiency is about lowering your long run costs.
Okay. Is it also got to do with like maximizing consumer welfare in the long run?
I believe that would probably be to do with allocative efficiency.
Okay.
So allocative efficiency is where P equals MC, and that would
Yeah.
maximize consumer welfare like we have here, where all consumers are satisfied and they're getting exactly what they want.
All right. Yeah.
But with like an imperfect diagram, you don't have that. Okay. So let's go with perfect competition now in more detail. Don't worry about these diagrams here. We already know this middle diagram here. So what are some of the characteristics again? Let's quickly go over them. So there's many buyers and sellers in the market. Any firm in a perfect competition market structure are price takers, meaning they can only charge one price. So that's what we see here. There's only one fixed price, and it's a horizontal line. Do you remember why they only charge one price? It's
They have
because
no monopoly power, so
yeah, they got
they
no
can't.
they
They
got
don't
no
have any price setting power.
yeah, true. They don't have any price setting power. They have the same homogeneous goods, don't they?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So there's no branding and they're identical. And even if they try to increase their price level, do you think that other firms would follow?
No.
No. And so that firm that increased their price, they will just lose out on revenue and probably go out of business. If they decrease their price level, what would happen?
Increase their sales.
If they
No,
de
they make a loss.
Yeah, so if they decrease their price levels, they make a loss because what they're trying to do is trying to capture more of the market share. They're trying to make more people go to them. But if other firms see that this rival firm is decreasing the price, what is that firm going to do?
Decrease their costs.
That firm is also going to decrease their price as well. They're going to try to match that. So there's no point decreasing your price because other firms are going to follow, and all that's happening is that you're losing your revenue. So was it really worth it? It's not, is it? So it's best thing to do, just keep your price the same. Okay, so there's freedom of entry and exit. So we looked at barriers of entry and exit and the different types of them. So it's very easy to go into the perfect competition market if you want to set up there, and it's easy to get out as well. There's perfect knowledge of prices. So everyone has to have the same prices. Everyone knows what other firms are doing. There's perfect information. And there's homogeneous goods, of course. So you always link homogeneous goods with the fact that they're price takers. Don't worry about this. So you can also show supernormal profits and subnormal profits with a perfect competition diagram. I think I took these graphs out of a different textbook because, as well as average cost, they're showing the average variable cost. Your average variable cost is always going to be below your average cost because the difference between them represents the fixed costs. Okay, so if you do AVC plus AFC, which is your average fixed cost, you get AC. You can represent those.
Do you know the short run perfect competition
Yeah.
diagram? Yeah. Don't you need to do two diagrams? You need to do the supply and demand, and
Yeah.
then next to it you do the perfect
Yeah,
competition one.
yeah. So that's what we're gonna see now.
All right. Yeah.
So what this basically is showing is two sides of the economy. So one side where we have a supply and demand diagram, which showing the industry as a whole, and then we have another side where it's showing the individual firm, how the individual firm is being affected. And the whole point of having these two diagrams is to show the evolution of a firm in perfect competition. Okay, because when a firm first sets up in this market, the perfect competition market, they don't make this normal profit straight away. You would expect that they make some super normal profits. Okay, and then other firms are going to join after, and that's going to decrease their profits and make this graph happen here where they make normal profits. And we're going to see how this happens. Okay. So this is the evolution from short term to long term. So in the short run, what we have our S1 and D1. Okay. So we're at price P1. Okay. So this is so forget S2 for now. We're at S1, D1, where we have equilibrium here, P1, and we can have like Q1 here, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Now, if we put an individual firm diagram, so these diagrams that we have seen, these are individual firm diagrams. They're not of the industry. We're looking at one specific firm and what they're doing. So in the industry, we have equilibrium here where S1 is equal to D1. Now, if we go across, what we can show is our price level line, which is also in perfect competition, our demand, our average revenue, and our margin revenue. And we just denote as D1, AR1, and MR1. It's our P1. So we have this line here at the top, looking at the top demand curve line. But this line here, this differs from what we've seen from perfect competition on the left here. Why? Because in the short run, an individual firm in perfect competition can make supernormal profits. So if we're on this line here, right, where is the firm going to produce? The firm's going to produce where they're going to maximize their profits. So MC is equal to MR again. That's where all firms want to produce. So at this point here, okay, so this is where MC, this kind of hook, this like Nike tick thing, is crossing the demand curve, and we're at Q1. Okay. Now at this point here, we hit our cost curve here, right? We hit our cost curve here, and that's why we're representing our costs here. It's our price. So all of this is supernormal profits in the short run. Okay. Now, is this gonna sustain in the long run?
No.
No, it's not going to sustain in the long run because more firms are going to see this. Other firms are going to see this. And remember, there's three barriers to entry and exit. And so it only makes sense that other firms are going to be encouraged to enter the market and they want to have a piece of the supernormal profits. They're going to be like, hold on, this firm's making supernormal profits and I can do the same thing for pretty much free. So let me go into this market and steal some of these profits. Okay, they're getting jealous. So what happens in the industry is that more firms join and this makes supply shift to the right, okay? Why does supply shift to the right? Because they're supplying more of the good, okay? There's more firms setting up, and for this good that this individual firm was making, let's think about the potato market, for example. Let's say more farmers decide to set up and join the market, and now they're supplying more potatoes, so supply is going to increase. Makes sense, right? And now we have a new equilibrium point here where we have P2 and Q2. And now what happens is that the demand curve is going to shift downwards. Okay? It's going to shift downwards to the point where we achieve this graph here that we saw at the start, where our average cost is tangent to the price line. Yeah. Okay. Now we're at P2, Q2. And then now we're in the long run. Okay. So at P1, we was in the short run, but as firms join more and more and more, we now have normal profits with this firm. Now
Do you
remember
know?
that, yeah,
Sorry. Do you know when you draw the second demand curve on the firm's diagram? Yeah.
yeah,
The D2, AR2, MR2. You first draw that at the bottom of the AC, and then you follow it along to the industry, right?
yeah,
And then you draw the new supply curve
yeah,
from there.
that would be helpful. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Alright.
when you practice drawing these diagrams, you have to know where to put P2. Don't put P2 at any random spot because it has to be tangent with the AC. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So it's easy to draw this P1 and this P1 version, the short-term version, and you show the supernormal profits, that's fine. Then it gets a bit tricky when you draw the P2 line. So just show the normal profits first on the graph on the right, and then follow it along with the P2 here. And wherever the dotted line crosses, draw the supply line. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, that's why I'm saying always practice the diagrams and make it like second nature because it will help a lot when saving time in your essays. And now this, when D1 goes to D2, it's not one sudden movement, okay? It's happening gradually over time. More and more firms are joining, okay? Sometimes people draw different, like a bunch of demand curves in between because it's slowly shifting down in steps. Do you get it? Obviously, when we draw it, we can't do all of that because it'd be too messy. So just draw it like we see here, okay? Oops. Yes. But did we understand that? Yeah. Do I need to go through over that again?
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So so this P1 was short run equilibrium and P2 was long run equilibrium. And whenever you think about perfect competition, remember that the end state of this market is this, okay? What we've already drawn at the start is this, okay? And now when you want to talk about this, we can talk about it further in terms of its efficiencies, if you ever need to describe it. One way is to talk about the efficiencies. Remember all the different types of efficiencies? We know that this is not dynamically efficient. Why is it not dynamically efficient?
Because they're not making any supernormal profits.
Yeah, exactly. They're not making any supernormal profits for them to lower their costs in the long run through reinvestment. But it has all the other types of efficiencies, productive efficiency, because it's at the minimum, it's producing at the minimum point of the average cost curve, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's lowering its cost. Allocative efficiency because it's producing where P is equal to MC. Okay. Remember the tip I gave you, if you're ever struggling to know where allocative efficiency is on a diagram, remember that your marginal cost is also your supply. Okay. Now, allocative efficiency occurs when all consumers are satisfied, when the market is in equilibrium, basically. And that happens where supply is equal to demand, right? Supply equal to demand at this point here. And we are producing at this point, okay? This is where P is also equal to marginal cost. And so we have allocative efficiency. There's normal profit where AC equals AR, we already know that. And there's X efficiency as well, because X efficiency occurs at any point on the average cost line. And it said that if you're producing at any point on the average cost line, you're basically minimizing your waste.
Isn't that, if you operate at the lowest point of the AC, right?
Yeah.
No, for any given output, if you operate at the AC, isn't that technically efficient?
Yeah, if you operate at any point on the average cost curve,
Yeah.
then that is called X efficiency. It is efficient. But if you
Oh,
see
okay,
like
yeah.
if you see like let's take this diagram here where we saw supernormal profits. We're not producing on the average cost curve here. We're producing this point here, this point here.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is not X efficient. But if you have normal profits, right? This blue line here in an imperfect competition, then this is, because we're producing on the average cost curve, this would be considered as X efficient.
Okay.
Okay. Would this point be here considered as, so if we have normal profits here, this blue line, consider that. Would this point be considered as, say, productively efficient?
No.
No, because we're not producing at the minimum point of the AC curve. The minimum point of the AC curve would be where MC cuts through it. Okay.
Yeah.
At this point, we're not producing here. Would it be considered as dynamically efficient if we're making normal profits?
No.
Dynamically efficient would be when we're making supernormal profits if we had this average cost here.
Yeah.
What about X efficiency? It would be X efficient because we're producing on the AC curve if we had normal profits.
Okay.
Okay. So when there is short run loss in perfect competition, there is less firm, so supply shifts to the left, which drives price up to the point where it reaches long run equilibrium. Okay, so there's an other side of this story where let's say that our original P1 was at a point where we were making short-term loss, okay? Where basically our price line, it would be below our average cost line, okay? So let's say our average cost was originally like here, okay? And this is our P1 curve, but at this point here, our costs are like here, C1, and this is our short-term loss. Do you get that?
Yeah.
Now, if you ever see this, okay, don't get scared because most teachers only show the supernormal profit side of things, but the same end result will still occur. You will still get this diagram at the end. Why? Because supply will now shift the opposite way. Okay, supply will now shift to the left, which would make your price level not P2 would not shift downwards now, it would go up where P2 is equal to this basically. All right. Well, it wouldn't be equal, it's just equal in this case because it has to look like go through here. Do you get it?
Yeah.
And that way you would have your end result with your long run equilibrium where you make normal profits. So supply will shift the opposite way because some firms would leave the market. So supplying less. With perfect competition, we also have something called a shutdown condition. This condition basically decides whether a firm that's making a short-term loss would either continue to produce or leave the market. Okay, so some firms in perfect competition, they can make subnormal profits. Okay, we can see here that these firms are making subnormal profits. Ignore the average variable cost for now, that'll come into play in a bit. So what we know so far is that we just represent the average cost, and both of these firms are making subnormal profits. They're in a loss. Okay, but how do we know which firm will decide to continue producing and which firms would decide to shut down? Okay, that's why it's called the shutdown condition. So basically, don't even worry about this diagram. Just know that the shutdown condition is basically if this firm can cover at least its average variable cost, then it will continue producing. Okay. So if you see here, can this firm cover its average variable cost?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can, isn't it? Because your average revenue is bigger than your average variable cost. And so this firm will continue to produce, it will not shut down because it can still pay its workers, its rent and stuff like that. Okay. So it can still produce. And in the long run, they may make normal profits. But this firm here, can it cover its average variable cost?
No.
It can't because it's not making enough revenue to cover its average variable cost. Average revenue is lower than AVC. Okay. So it can't cover it. What if my average variable cost was tangent like this? Would it continue producing?
I think they do something called break even or something.
Yeah, so here they're breaking even. So
What does that mean though?
breaking even is basically when you're basically matching your cost and your average variable cost or like your normal costs are matching like what you're actually earning, your average revenue. Okay. It's not too important. It's basically normal profits. Okay.
All right.
But if your average variable cost looks like this, then you're still able to actually cover your cost, right? Because your average revenue is equal to your average variable cost. So you're still able to cover your average variable cost. So you can still continue producing. So this firm would actually continue producing still. Okay, if it was tangent. Okay, good. Now let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum. Okay, so in general, perfect competition, what we just saw here, this doesn't really exist in real life. This is like the perfect market that you can get. Yeah, this is what economists want to see because all these characteristics here represent a perfect market. Okay, where we have like basically almost all the efficiencies and everyone is satisfied. There's many buyers and sellers, and there's no like exploitation, there's no like monopoly power, anything like that. Okay, now this is perfect in economists' eyes, but does this happen in real life? It doesn't really happen in real life. You can have like near perfect competition firms or near monopoly firms, but in reality, they're not actually fully in perfect competition or fully a monopoly. Do you get it? So let's look at monopolies now. So like the opposite end of the spectrum. So what we just saw was perfect competition. And then on the other side, we have a monopoly. Okay. And in between, we look at other firms. So we can have monopolistic competition, understood as MC. We'll look at this later. So and when you come back to this, you'll understand it more. We'll look at monopolistic competition, and then we look at something called oligopolies. Okay. So this is like the, let's say, I don't know, the power spectrum, okay, where firms in perfect competition have the least power. And then after that, we have firms in monopolistic competition, which have a bit of different characteristics to this one, but it has more power. And then we have oligopolies, which has different characteristics to this one, and all of them, and oligopolies have more power than either of these. Then we have the last one, which is monopolies, which has the most power and has different characteristics to all of these. Okay. So we're jumping from perfect competition to monopolies now and seeing how these two extremes differ. Okay, so what's the characteristics of a firm as a monopoly? First of all, do we know what a monopoly is?
Yeah, a legal monopoly owns like more than 25% of the market share.
Yeah, so that's one way you can describe it, definitely, okay? So in economics, if you want to decide whether something is a monopoly or not, you could look at how much of the market they actually dominate. So you said it was 25%, right? So sometimes you might get like a chart, like a pie chart, which shows how much of each firm like how much of each firm holds in terms of market share. And if you see a firm holds more than 25%, then they could be considered as a monopoly. Okay, but in general, when we look at a monopoly, there is only one firm in the industry which has a very high market share. Barriers to entry prevent new firms from entering the market. So it has very high barriers to entry and very high barriers to exit. Okay. It's a short run profit maximizer, or just a profit maximizer, really. It produces where MC is equal to MR. That's the profit maximizing condition, never forget it. And it has monopoly power. So it has monopoly power, which means that it can be a price maker and it has differentiated products. Okay. So can you see how it's completely differing from the characteristics we saw here with the perfect competition? Okay. It's completely the opposite, isn't it? It will have imperfect knowledge as well. Revenue curves of a monopolist. So we already know the revenue curves. This is how the total revenue curve looks like. We saw that as well on the first week. It's not too important to know this. Just know it if you ever get it in like, if you ever need to show revenue maximization, you can show it on the total revenue curve. Revenue maximization also occurs here, where MR is equal to 0. Okay. Why is it when MR equal to 0 is considered as revenue maximization? Do you know why? Well, it's because the meaning of marginal revenue is basically the extra amount of revenue you get from producing an extra unit of that good. Okay, whatever good they're producing, marginal revenue means that extra amount of revenue you'll get. And if your extra amount of revenue that you get is equal to 0 at a certain point in production, so your output level here, for example, then that means you've just revenue maximized. Okay, if you decide to produce one more unit above this point here, where MI is equal to 0, your marginal revenue will start to go negative. Okay, can you see how the line is going below and starts to go negative in terms of the price? and that's not revenue maximization anymore. So revenue maximization stops where we just hit MI is equal to 0 on the x-axis on the output line. Okay, so that's the point where we cannot get any more revenue. This diagram is so bad. I don't know what I was doing when I was drawing this. Forget this. Let's just look at. So this diagram is basically showing this here. Okay, that's what we want to look at. I did a bit wrong here. I put my cost here for some reason. That's not correct, is it? My cost is up here, right? Where I hit my average cost. And so the supernormal profit is represented by the green shaded area. So what we're looking at is this diagram here. So we can basically describe these in terms of efficiency again. So is it allocatively efficient? No, because P does not equal to MC. P is bigger than MC. And in general, allocative efficiency on this diagram would be where supply is equal to demand. So it would be at this point here. I'll just do it in blues. So this would be where P is equal to MC. If we were producing at this blue point here, that would be allocative efficiency, okay? Productive efficiency? No, because we're not even producing on the average cost curve, we're producing here. And productive efficiency is when we produce at the minimum point of the average cost curve. So we would have to produce here, but that's not happening. Dynamic efficiency, yes, the dynamic efficiency, we explained why, the supernormal profits, it can be reinvested for innovative reasons and lower cost in the long run. That's all dynamic efficiency is about, lowering cost in the long run. Is it X efficient? No, because we're not even producing on the average cost curve. We saw that. And so there's a lot of waste. However, they get away with it since there's no competition and they have monopoly power. Monopoly pretty much get away with everything. So we want to look at these massive firms a bit further and some of the activities that they do. And one way we look at them is how monopolies, these massive corporations, how they can discriminate consumers. Okay, so this is a topic in itself that we're going to look at. So if we read this, some buyers in the market will be prepared to pay a higher price for a product than other buyers. For example, a millionaire faced with the need for heart surgery is likely to pay more than a person on a low income with the same complaint. Okay, and so a monopoly knows this, and it will try to discriminate these two types of buyers. And what do I mean by discriminating? When I say discriminate, it will try to charge different prices for different segments of the market. Okay, and they do this because they want more money. It only makes sense. So a monopolist may be able to split the market and price discriminate between different buyers. It may be able to charge OB for OK, so OB for OK, okay, so B and K, that's what we're basically looking at. And then charge a lower price, OA, so A here, for KH, so OH basically, so A and H. Okay. Which means the monopolist appropriates AB, EG, this square here, of consumer surplus. So it's basically making higher profits by producing different price levels. So don't worry about this diagram too much and these annotations. Just know so far that the monopolists will charge different prices for different segments of the market. And the whole point of discriminating monopolies is what they're trying to do. They're trying to capture more consumer surplus. Okay, do you remember what consumer surplus is?
Is the difference between how much a consumer is willing to pay and how much they actually pay.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. So So yeah, so the whole point, the whole thing that monopolies are trying to do is trying to get as much out of a consumer as possible. So if a consumer is willing to pay a high price, then that monopolist will try to charge them a high price. Okay. If a consumer you know cannot really afford it, then in that monopolist might be able to still make a profit from that consumer and charge them a lower price. And there's different ways the monopolist can discriminate is by looking at time, place, and income. Okay. So you may be able to charge a different price at different times of the day or week. Okay? What's an example of this? How have you ever seen a monopolist charging a different price given the different times of the day? Okay.
Um, could it be the like, I don't know, rush hour?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at TFL, they charge a higher price at rush hour, isn't it? If you ever use your Oyster card, for example, then you'll see that if you're traveling during rush hour, it's taking more money out of you than when you wasn't traveling at rush hour. But the whole point is that the monopolist knows that some people would be still willing to travel even if they're getting charged a higher price. And so they're getting more out of that consumer. And yeah, they're charging a lower price when it's off-peak times. Okay. Place, so it may vary price according to the location of the buyer. For example, in different countries, there's different prices of cars. So maybe in a richer country, a monopolist might charge higher. In a less rich country, maybe in a developing country, prices of cars may be lower. Income, so you may charge a higher price to consumers with high incomes and low price to those with low incomes. So maybe like what we just saw, someone demanding heart surgery. Conditions to price discriminate. We don't really need to know this. Just know that the monopolist has to be able to split the market into different groups, and it's gonna have to charge different prices. And it has to make sure, one thing that it needs to make sure is that there's no arbitrage. Okay, this basically means that someone who is getting charged a lower price is not able to basically buy at a lower price and sell at a higher price to the other group. Do you get it? It has to make those two markets separate from each other. Otherwise, there's arbitrage. People are profiting off it. Okay, so let's look at, so there's 3 degrees of price discrimination. Okay, there's 3 degrees that we're going to look at. There's first, second, and third. So if you look at the first degree of price discrimination, okay, this is also called perfect price discrimination. So this is where each individual customer is charged the maximum they are willing to pay. They're charged the maximum they are willing to pay for a given good. And this will turn all consumer surplus into extra revenue. So if you look at this diagram here, sorry, I put the both the diagrams at the bottom. So this is the one on the left is first degree. Okay, so this is just a normal demand curve. Okay, and let's say we're charging a price at P here, at PQ. Now at PQ here, we have all of this consumer surplus, isn't it? Right. Well, the consumer surplus is also defined by it's a shaded area above the price line and below the demand curve. Okay, that's from last year's micro. If you need help on that, just let me know. So this shaded area represents the consumer surplus. Okay. Now this is basically a measure of welfare, right? How well off consumers are, because there's some consumers that would have been willing to pay a higher price. Okay, there's one consumer right up here that would have actually paid this maximum price here. There's some consumer further down that would have paid a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less. So what's happening is that the monopolist knows this and it's going to charge every consumer the maximum they're actually willing to pay. Okay, and it's going to it's going to make this shaded area all turn into revenue now. Okay, consumer surplus is now turning into revenue. And so that's how they're discriminating. Okay. What's the drawback of this? The cost of gathering the required information to do this, and the difficulty in preventing seepage, which is basically buying low and selling high, what we just saw, makes this method unlikely to be used in practice. It's a very hard, like realistically, how is a monopolist going to know what each and every one of their customers is willing to pay? Okay, and can it really get away with this? It really can't, can it? I might be paying to would be willing to pay a higher price than you, for example. Maybe I'm earning more than you, and so the monopolist is charging me more. But then I'm gonna be like, what the hell? Like you're charging this guy less because I'm earning more, and you're discriminating. The monopolist can't really get away with that. So first degree in real life doesn't really exist, but it is still a method that we can talk about in our essays. Okay. Let's look at second degree price discrimination now. So this is often used in wholesale markets where lower prices are charged to people who purchase large quantities. So basically like bulk buying. And the price varies with the amount of quantities you buy. So this turns some of the consumer surplus into revenue for the seller and encourages large orders. So this is a good way to get rid of excess capacity. Okay. So if you look at this diagram here, say if we were producing at P2, Q2, right? And say if a consumer wanted to actually purchase Q1, the firm might offer to charge a lower price so that it encourages more people to buy and they can still profit off of it. Okay. So the main one that we want to look at now is something called third degree price discrimination. So what we've been talking about so much is the fact that they're able to split the market into two. Okay. And don't get confused by this diagram. You're probably wondering where our marginal cost curves is. So here we've just assumed that obviously it's going to be the same firm charging different prices. We're just going to assume that the marginal cost is constant. Okay, so that's why we just have one horizontal dotted line and we're going to call this marginal cost. So basically we have group A on the left and group B on the right. Okay. And let's just say that on the left we have peak times and on the right we have off-peak times. And when it's peak times, let's say for, I don't know, for the TFL, we're able to charge a higher price than when it's off-peak, right? Because there's going to be more people wanting to travel when it's peak times and less people wanting to travel when it's off-peak times. So they're going to try to encourage more people to travel in off-peak times by setting a lower price, okay? So we have a higher price on the left and a lower price on the right. So is this beneficial for the firm doing this? Would it be better to do this than charging one single price at any given time of the day? It is better for the firm in terms of revenue and profit. It is better for them to charge a different price. That's the whole point of price discrimination. So if we look at here, if they charge a higher price on the left and a lower price on the right, if we add both of these shaded boxes together, then what we have is a higher amount of profit than if we had the same level of price throughout the whole thing. That's basically the theory behind it. Okay, it's going to make higher profits this way. So just make sure you memorize this diagram. Sometimes you might see that some teachers or some textbooks or even in your exam, they actually put 3 diagrams. So they show these first 2, and on the end, they show one final one, which basically represents the adding of these 2. So they add these 2 diagrams for a third diagram on the right, and all they're doing is finding the midpoint of the prices, okay? So the difference between the prices and showing like the average profit. But obviously to draw 3 diagrams in an essay is a bit long. So you can also get away with just drawing these 2, okay? You just need to explain what I just told you about the fact that they make higher profits charging a different price at different times of the day. Okay. And so why does this actually work? What's the theory behind it? So the economic theory behind it is what we already know in terms of the elasticities of demand. Okay. So on the left here, we can see that this demand curve or the curves in general are more inelastic than the ones on the right, isn't it? Yeah. It's because inelastic PED is at peak times makes sense because at any given price level, even if you change the price by a bit, quantity won't really change by that much because people still need to, for example, travel at that time. It's almost becomes like a necessity. Whereas on the right, when it's off peak times, people can take other alternatives. Yeah, they're not really in a rush or anything like that. So for a given change in price, quantity will change by a lot. And if you think about revenue maximization from last year, we saw that whenever it's inelastic, you should increase your price. Whenever your demand curve is inelastic, you should increase your price. And whenever your demand curve is elastic, you should decrease your price. Because that way, as a firm, you're able to make more revenue. Okay, it's a strategy. So this is what's basically happening here. We're just representing it in our new kind of set of graphs. Price discrimination, positives and negatives. So the use of price discrimination means that some or all the consumer surplus is converted into revenue for the seller and used to improve products or invest in more efficient production methods. So in one sense, you can say that price discrimination is pretty good. But is it good for the consumer's price discrimination? What do you think? Well, it depends on the type of price discrimination. You could argue that with first degree price discrimination, it's not really good for the consumers, is it? Because every consumer is being charged the maximum amount they're willing to pay. And so there's no consumer surplus because all of it is turned into revenue. For second degree price discrimination, it could be good for some people because they're getting charged a lower price for bulk buying. For third degree price discrimination, it's going to be good for some people and it's going to be bad for some people. The people on the peak times are paying a higher price than the people on the off-peak times for the same service. Okay. So this is the argument behind it. So there's positives and negatives. Average revenue is greater than marginal cost, so price discrimination does not lead to allocative efficiency. Or of course, there's not going to be allocative efficiency here. P does not equal to MC. Consumers are not treated equally. You already know that. A monopsony. Okay, so there's something called a monopsony, which is also another market structure. This is a situation when a single buyer dominates the market. So what we've just seen here with a monopoly, this was a single seller. The opposite of a monopoly is something called a monopsony, where we have a situation where there's a single buyer that's dominating the market, and they can act as a price maker, or we might see even later in the labor market, they can also be a wage maker. For example, supermarkets are sometimes accused of acting as a monopsonist when buying from their suppliers. So suppliers may end up making a loss by selling at too low of a price. Okay, so a supermarket, they can be the sole buyer of like fresh ingredients from like farmers. Okay, now that supermarket is going to bargain for lower prices with that farmer. And the farmer kind of has to comply. Okay, if the farmer wants to still continue production, then it has to comply with the supermarket and whatever they want. Okay, so the supermarket could say, I want to buy this product, this ingredient from you for a lower price now. And the supermarket can do that because it has monopsony power. They are the only buyer of that market. Okay, so that's the difference. You can also argue that the government is a monopsony because they're the sole buyer of like nurses and doctors and stuff in the NHS, right? And so they set their wages, okay? And you could argue that nurses are like underpaid for how much they do. And so that's because the government is using its monopsony power. Do you get it? So yeah, they're basically exploiting suppliers, employees, and consumers. We'll look at this a bit further, but sometimes you do get some essay questions where it's talking about, it's very common actually with supermarkets that this happens, where it's talking about the exploitation of suppliers. And then most likely they're gonna give you like a case study you need to like read, and you just have to as long as you know what a monopsony is and you're not completely baffled by it, you would be all right with that question. Okay, let's go over this. Should we go over this? Have you guys ever heard of a natural monopoly?
Yeah.
So yeah, a natural monopoly is like a monopoly that we've seen, but there's some differences between it. Just now, whenever you hear a natural monopoly, you're probably thinking about a monopoly that's producing a certain type of commodity, okay, or like a raw material. For example, so this is where a massive cost advantage for the first firm that enters the market, where there's extremely high fixed cost, okay? And this is very common with like commodity firms, with like gas companies, water companies, rail companies, whatever, okay, oil companies. So these are called natural monopolies, and these these firms, they're monopolies because they may be the first firm that sets up in the market. For example, I'm sure you guys know like Thames Water, right? Or like British Gas or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay? These are like natural monopolies. And so we say, for example, like, yeah.
In an exam, if they ask like, what's a natural monopoly, what do we say?
So there's no like exact definition for it. You just need to say it's a firm, it's the first firm that sets up in the market that has a massive cost advantage compared to any other firms that set up after it. And you just give an example saying like a gas company or a water company.
All right.
So
And you
say
just,
if you like said a firm which is seen as a necessity in an economy, would you get marked down for that?
no, you can also say that they are a necessity, and we'll see why they're a necessity. The government needs them, definitely. The government will always try to do anything in their power with a natural monopoly to make sure that they're meeting the needs of consumers. Okay, because we need these gas companies, don't we? We need these water companies. Without them, what are we gonna do? We're not gonna get any supply, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, so basically, for example, with a water company, there's a huge cost in pipelining all the houses that other competition would be wasteful to duplicate it, as the original firm would drive out the competition. Yeah. If you think about Thames Water, they've pipelined all of our houses with water, right? And so if another firm wants to compete with Thames Water, if another firm comes out of nowhere, there's no way they can do this, okay? Because the cost of repipelining everything is just too substantial, okay? It's not worth it.
The sunk costs are really high.
Yeah, exactly. Sunk costs are really high, good. And so this first firm, this Thames Water that's set up, they've already drived out the competition, okay? No other firm is going to follow them because it's just not worth it. And so remember when we looked at some average cost curves and we said that firms that have massive cost basically, their average cost looks like this, okay? This long run average cost and this long run marginal cost is like sloping downwards, okay? So it is basically our normal average cost like this, okay? Except that because there's so much there's so much costs with these natural monopolies that it will take them a long time before they can reach this point, this like bottom point, which is also called the MES, if you go back. So it just keeps sloping downwards, and eventually it will come up if they produce enough. But it would take them so long to produce at the minimum point of their average cost curve, or which is also called the minimum efficient scale, to exploit economies of scale. Economies of scale is, remember, it's producing, as you produce more, you're lowering your costs. Okay. It's a bit hard to explain, but just know that this is how the average cost looks like for a firm in as a natural monopoly. Okay. So then you draw your normal average revenue curve and your normal demand curve and your normal marginal revenue. So it looks a bit messy, but first we had the two long run average cost and long run marginal cost. Then you draw your normal revenue curves. Remember, it's a monopoly, so they can be a price maker. And so that's why our curves are diagonal. It's not a horizontal like perfect competition. And we got to the point where MC is equal to MR again. And that would be where? It would be this point here, isn't it? Where MC is equal to MR. And so at this point here, we make supernormal profits here if we keep going further up. But this is seen as not good enough. Okay, this is seen as not good enough because I remember when I said natural monopolies are a necessity. And so at producing at Q1, is everyone satisfied at Q1?
No.
No, everyone is satisfied where supply is equal to demand or where P is equal to MC, otherwise known as allocative efficiency, isn't it? Where is the allocative efficient point on this diagram? Where the supply equal to demand? Supply is equal to demand at this point here, right? I'll do it in blue. Supply is equal to demand at this point here. So this is where the government wants this natural monopoly to produce. So the government is going to say, listen, this isn't good enough. I want you to produce at this blue point here, where your price is at P2 and your cost is at C2. So what's the problem with this now?
They're gonna make a loss.
Yeah, they're making a loss. This whole shaded area at the bottom, this is a loss, right? Because your costs are bigger than your revenue or your price level. And so this natural monopoly, this say Thames Water, is going to turn around and say, well, we can produce at this point, but we're making a loss. So we can't really sustain this in the long run. So you're going to have to do something about this. Okay, so the government is going to be like, no, no worries. I still need you to produce at this point here, Q2, so that everyone is getting water and making sure that everyone has this necessity. In return, I'm going to subsidize you. Remember what a subsidy is? It's basically, yeah.
Grant by the
They give them
government.
Yeah, exactly. It's a grant, they give the money. So they're going to subsidize this loss. And if they subsidize this loss, they're basically making what type of profit?
normal profit.
Normal profit, exactly. Okay. So this is how some natural monopolies are going to run. Okay. So at the end of the day, it's the government that's taking a hit, but the government has to do this, otherwise, there's going to be chaos. So that's basically all you need to know for natural monopolies, okay? We'll leave it there for today, and next week we're going to finish on monopolistic competition and then oligopolies. We're going to look at something called game theory as well. This is all recorded, so I'm going to upload this and then send it in the group chat. Is there any questions?
No.
Yeah, how'd you find it though? Is that okay?
Yeah, that was good. That was good. Helped.
Yeah. See, this is why I prefer doing it online, because I feel like I can get so much more done than in real life. Because I've taught in real life, and we just move so much more slower, because first of all, I need to wait for you to actually write things down, and there's
Yeah.
nothing for you to look back to. Do you know what I mean? That's what I was trying to explain to your mom.
Right. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
fine.
so you always have this to look back on. If there's any questions, don't DM me, put it in the group chat, because if I because I want everyone to have the same level of knowledge. We all need to help each other because economics is hard, and there might be something that's helpful to you or something that you don't know. And if I can just put it in one group chat, it will be helpful for everyone. Okay.
Yep.
And you can also like ask each other questions too if I'm not about.
All right.
All right, so we'll leave it there for today. Yeah, so just make sure you look back at the videos. It's very, very vital you look back at them and just add up your knowledge all the time, because so this document here, we're basically halfway. But obviously you can see there's a lot to take in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just make sure you don't leave it last minute. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the main thing about economics, because I don't want to get to a point where we're doing essays and then I'm having to go back over content because we've forgotten stuff, and we're just going to move too slowly because we need to go through a lot, and we need to also go through the year 1 content as well, because it could also still be tested on that.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine then. I'll see you guys next week, inshallah.
All right.
All right,
Inshallah.
take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.